All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Audio Issues Happy Hour, where we share a beer and I answer some of your questions about mixing. If you don't know me or for some reason randomly happened upon this just this moment, I am Björgvin Benedictson. I'm the author of Step by Step Mixing and the founder of Audio Issues. Been writing audio production and mixing for about 10 years or so. And I like drinking beer and answering your questions. So today I am drinking Dragoon Brewing from Tucson. Again, always support local here. And it's it's slowly becoming one of my favorite beers, the Refraction Pale Ale. However, today we are actually joined by a special guest, and I'm going to add him on the stream right now. And it is Mr. Matt Boudreau of Working Class Audio. Cheers, Matt.
Cheers. It's now 5 o'clock, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, it's like they say, it is 5:30 somewhere. It's actually 5:30 in Colorado.
There you go. We're just in time.
Exactly. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. For those that don't know you, we've been friends for years now. We see each other every week. I know enough about you, but definitely tell us more.
Let's see. I'm an audio engineer. I'm the host of the Working Class Audio podcast. Comes out weekly, workingclassaudio.com. Check it out. Mm-hmm. You can also go to mattboudreau.com and check out my audio work that I do. I mostly mix and master these days because live tracking of bands and studios and such is kind of come to a halt. So mostly doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm also a drummer, not actively, kind of put that on the back burner. And I've spent the early part of my adult life, touring and recording as a drummer. Had a couple decent sized record deals in the days of 6-figure record deals where where it was all tape and Pro Tools didn't exist. The internet didn't exist. Cell phones didn't, or actually cell phones started to exist. In fact, I remember being on tour and the tour manager had one of those early Motorola brick cell phones.
One of these guys.
Yeah, it was massive, massive. And at some point I was asked to produce a record from a local band, like a math rock type band in San Francisco. And I said yes, and found more enjoyment in doing that than I did in playing drums. And I slowly transitioned to the other side of the glass. Had a couple studio incarnations, succeeded at some, failed at others. And as a result of failing at the last one, in my opinion, failing, I created Working Class Audio so I could use that as a platform to ask questions of my friends and peers in the world of audio to find out how they make it work, how they survive, how they, function financially, how they deal with work-life balance, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And I'm a dad, husband, live in Northern California, got a couple kids who are driving me absolutely insane while we're stuck at home. But actually, it's good. I'm having fun with them too because we're doing projects. We're doing like 3D printing projects today.
All right, cool. Well, cheers to that. Thanks for coming on. Let's dive into some questions from the audience.
Yeah, look at all those people. Look at that.
Yeah. So, Gary Roser, my name is Björgvin, so I get to butcher other people's names. He asked how to duck bass and bass drum. You want to take this one?
I could technically. It's not something I do very often. It seems like in EDM music, it's more common. I could be wrong about that. But sometimes you can, let's say that you want to get the kick drum to punch through a little more in a mix. I think the common practice is to put a compressor over the bass, and then you key in the bass drum. In other words, you feed the signal of the bass drum over to the bass compressor so that every time the bass compressor hears the kick drum, it compresses, and it uses that as the reference point of, oh, I hear the kick drum now. I'm going to compress the bass. And then it kind of ducks it down and the kick drum can punch through a little more easily.
Yep.
That's a quick and dirty answer.
Yeah. So it's just, sidechain compression, and I tend to use a fast attack and a fast release so that it doesn't affect the bass guitar as much, and the kick comes through real clearly as well, and usually just a few dB, maybe even only 2. So it's supposed to, obviously in EDM it is very noticeable and audible, and especially when you sidechain compress maybe the synth to the kick drum, that's super popular. And but in just to get rock mixes a little clearer, I tend to do that sometimes too when I need to. So hope that was helpful, Gary.
Thanks,
We
Gary.
got a mixing and mono question, and I actually do have a mixing and mono question here as well from Paul Ramos. He says, many pros say mix in mono, many pros say don't. Each has their own reason. I try to mix in mono and find value when I'm doing it with low mids. Don't see the actual value with it. How does mixing in mono make me a better producer? And then going on Alan's question here, mixing mono, why do two separately recorded guitars, 2 takes panned wide and left and right, sound way louder in stereo than in mono? Can this still be a phasing issue? Which is correct. What do you think about the phasing issue? Do you think it is a phasing issue?
Well, that doesn't. I'm not really clear. I don't really think it's a phasing issue, because if they're pushing and pulling in the same direction, and then they're summed in mono, yeah, boy, I just don't reference in mono very often. The only time I actually reference in mono is when I stream to my phone. So I'll be honest with you, I don't have a real clear-cut answer about that. Why does that do that? That's one of those things I always, if I pop it in mono and everything gets the guitars get a little quieter, then I'm like, oh well.
Right. So as for mixing in mono, just in general, like I tend to mix a lot of the music just in mono on a mix cube to get started, so that I can if I can get it sounding halfway decent on a real shitty speaker in mono, then I know that I'm on the right track to when I flip it over to the real speakers and push it into stereo. And I find value in panning in mono too, because it kind of seems to do this very interestingly. So like when you're panning instruments, you're kind of creating separation, and then when it's in mono, you're not panning it here and here. You're kind of panning it, like that, or at least that's how I hear it. Maybe I'm just making all that up, but that's what I that's what I think. As for the loudness of 2 guitars, I'm not sure what. I don't have a good enough engineering physics knowledge to know exactly what happens when you sum 2 guitars into mono. If they're double tracked and they're separate guitar tracks, they shouldn't have any weird comb filtering issues. But they are louder because it is simply 2 tracks of stereo or of audio, and therefore double the amount of amplitude and therefore louder. So yeah. And then he actually follows up with another question. Similar reverbs tend to disappear in mono. Why? I think it's right related to the previous question. So what do you think of that?
Once again, I guess I'm not spending enough time in mono, because I've never noticed reverbs to disappear. Now that actually stereo reverbs may have some phasing issues going on there. This is one of those, it depends what's going on. There's no like hardcore answer. I think if, depends on the reverb, depends on if it's a true stereo reverb or if it's a mono in stereo out reverb that's kind of doing some kind of trickery on the back end there to create a stereo signal on the output. Right. Like some reverbs used to do. Right. Like some digital reverbs used to do.
For sure. Yeah, it's just like, it's stereo and folding everything. Things are gonna inevitably get lost. And that's why I tend to check a lot of mixes in mono, just to make sure that I can live with it in mono. It's never going to be like, I can't make it sound as good as I want it to in mono, but I make sure that it's at least decent enough in mono so that, you know, if it happens to be played in a weird mono speaker somewhere, then it's not completely destroyed. I was actually watching an interesting mix walkthrough of Jason Joshua. He's one of the Mix with the Masters guys. He was going through Rosalia's new track, or one of the recent singles. I just got a membership and I'm eating it up. It is amazing.
The Mix with the Masters video thing.
Yeah, the membership. It's great.
Yeah, I got a lot of value out of that.
Yeah, and he was talking about, he was showing us a bunch of effects, and he was using stereo spatializers in just nutso ways, just completely destroying the sort of mono signal, and it just made it kind of look, you know, on the goniometer or what do you call it, it looked like just rain, like it was everywhere, you know, instead of being like a mono signal just going straight up, it was just candy everywhere. So, well, I guess he's gone. We'll see if he comes back. But let's move on to the next question. Here we go.
I'm back.
All right. Welcome back.
You were cutting in and out, and I switched from Wi-Fi to wired, and in the process, completely screwed myself. So,
right.
I'm back.
Well, we're on to another question, and let me know. Actually, people in the audience, I'd love to know if the audio or if I'm cutting in and out just in general, because I'm just on a Wi-Fi connection as well. So I might have to.
You're cutting out for me a bit.
Okay. Well, I might have to hook up my internet or my computer to the wired.
Wired.
Yeah. hard line it. All right. Steve asks, what is the best way to maintain clarity in the mix and maintain a nice full guitar sound when mixing multiple electric guitar parts?
Can I take that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love mixing hard rock stuff with lots of guitars, and so what's the best? Let's take it one bit at a time. What's the best way to maintain clarity in the mix? Okay, let's start with that. First of all, let's start with the bottom end. Okay. So I think you have to make a decision of whether or not between the bass guitar and the kick drum, who's going to be on top, so to speak, meaning who's going to take up more of the sub-low information and who's going to take up, you know, more of the top level of the low information. Having them both occupy the same low frequency space from like 100 hertz down, or let's go a little lower. Let's say like 80 hertz down. You got to make some sacrifices there. So what I tend to do is I tend to high pass the bass around, I don't know, I'd have to look at I'm going to open up a Pro Tools session that I've been working on as I'm talking to you, so I can look and tell you what I did on a recent mix. Basically high pass the bass, let the bass occupy, you know, kind of that upper level of territory, and let the bass drum become the bottom portion of that. You can also do the inverse. You can high pass the kick drum and let the bass be the one who occupies the very, very bottom octave there. So that's a start. That helps to establish that low end. The other thing I tend to do is I use a lot of drum samples when I mix, because most of the stuff that gets sent to me, the drums are recorded in poor environments or they're poorly recorded, but the performances are good. Sorry?
Troubled tracks, if you will.
Troubled tracks, right. We'll talk about that later if we want. So what I tend to do is focus on using snare drum samples that aren't real high pitched. Like we're talking about lower pitched snare drum samples that don't get in the way of the vocal and don't compete with the guitars very much. That way, if you're using hard pan left and right guitars, they can cut through a little easier. And then, you know, also figuring out what's going to be in the foreground, what's going to be in the background. Hang on, I'm finding a mix now that I've done that on. And I'll keep talking while I'm looking. Sure. So figuring out what's going to be in the foreground, what's going to be in the background. And also not over, if it's a fast song, don't use a lot of reverb. a lot of dense reverb. Use delays to get your effects across. If you want to, create a little slap back with the guitars or the vocals, do that instead of
Yeah.
relying on, don't try to shove everything through a real dense reverb when you're doing a fast mix, or sorry, a fast tempo song, I should say. If it's a slower
Right.
song, you've got more space and you can kind of expand a bit. And then also, generally if you have two guitar players in a band, or let's say you have one guitar player and they've done a couple parts. If they've done the same part twice, maybe try to get a little differentiation between the left and the right guitar
Yeah.
is how I would do it. And
Yeah.
don't be afraid to use distortion on the bass, on the vocal a little bit, maybe double the vocal, put a little distortion on the vocal.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a million ways that I do it that may not work for you, but I find that works for me.
Right.
And my
Yeah, and
clients may be happy with that.
it's fun because sometimes clarity it can be achieved by sort of dirtying things up because they become more defined. And when you have something that is defined, it pops out instead of being just super clear in the mix, So there's a difference between EQing it perfectly and making it sound really good and right there, but maybe it lacks character. So that's when you create clarity through definition by maybe adding a little saturation or some distortion or
A lot of
things,
saturation.
or a lot of saturation. Yeah. What I like doing now, especially when it comes to guitars and things that I want to add a little bit of depth to, is I'll put a delay as an insert on the guitars or on the keyboards, just with 10% wet, and then add maybe a 16th note or 32 notes like dotted or something like that. Just that adds that tiny bit of depth to the front and back field. And I think that is it creates these like sort of micro delay shifts that widen and make the mix bigger, even while you're just doing some rough balancing and EQ and compression.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah. Actually do have if anybody's interested in how to do that stuff on the inserts, I was trying to find it earlier, but I should not I should be focused on on the task at hand. And but if you go to the mix stream playlist on my YouTube channel, you can find there's a video that talks about how to use delays in an insert to create those sort of separation there. So check that out. I hope that gave you at least some ideas to help you add some clarity and separate guitars. Obviously, one other thing that we didn't talk about is I tend to EQ the guitars, especially if they're left and right. I tend to EQ them differently so that they're popping out in different frequency areas, and they're also, maybe I'll add an amp sim or a cab simulation or something to sort of create character and add some different stuff to it so that it pops out more. All right.
Cool.
So next question here. How would you overdub a drum set the way Def Leppard's guitarist overdubbed his guitar strings one at a time? That's a very good question. I don't think I have enough information about history to be able to answer it.
I can talk a little bit about that, but only from maybe separation of the drum and the cymbals. And I think it's Queens of the Stone Age is my example, and it's the album with No One Knows, and
Yep. Songs for the Deaf.
Songs for the Deaf. So Dave Grohl played drums, and they overdubbed the cymbals and the drums independent of one another. And there's stories about that on the internet.
Yeah.
Basically, I think they had electronic drum cymbal pads so Dave could hit something, like hit the cymbals.
Right.
And then they would, so real drums, rubberized cymbals for the first pass. And then the second pass would be rubber or, dampened down drums and real cymbals on the next pass. Right. Little bit of a pain in the butt, really. Yeah. And in fact, I've seen an interview with Dave Grohl where he was complaining, like, whose idea was this? Or maybe it was Eric Valentine who was telling the story, because Eric's the one who did the record.
Right.
As far as, yeah, Def Leppard, now Def Leppard records as a piece of music art sound amazing. It's a different thing to me altogether. But that's also part of the craziness of Mutt Lange, who produced those records, who's very OCD about all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
Right.
do you want to do that? I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't have the patience for that. But if you want to do it, you could always, try it that way.
Right.
Separate the drums from the cymbals.
Right. Yeah, it's mentioned in Sylvia Massey's book, Recording Unhinged. She did it once for some, I can't remember for which artist it was, and then also for there was a Sonic Highways episode, the Foo Fighters episode. That's actually the Foo Fighters did an entire HBO series on recording every single song on Sonic Highways, and there is one song on it where they played together, sort of facing each other. One person played the hi-hat, and so Taylor played the hi-hat, or Dave played the hi-hat, and then the other person played the actual drums to get some weird separation. And I just thought it was cool. I mean, if you're into recording and production in any way, like, you're gonna love that episode, or love that entire series. I don't know if you've seen it, Matt, but
I have.
It's it's spectacular. Yeah, cool. All right, let's move on to some submitted questions here. Here we go.
You're starting to robotize a bit. You're.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out for me still.
Let me just shut everything down.
You may have to go get the Ethernet cable.
Oh yeah, just plug it straight into the hard line.
Right into your head.
Yeah.
Matrix style.
Right. Well, we will let me just close everything possible. See if that does anything. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does.
Oh, I love it. There's another question coming up from Lauro that I'm already.
All
there
right.
we go. How you doing, Lauro?
How much do expensive plugins make your life easier when mixing? I mean, they're not the key, but nobody's mixing with stock plugins. What do you think, Matt? Nobody?
I wouldn't agree. I don't believe in absolutes there. So nobody. I think there are some people mixing with stock plugins. Now, how much do expensive plugins make your life easier? Well, they don't, because they cost you a lot more money. So I think it's the key is finding the plugins that do the job for you and have a graphic user interface that you feel comfortable with. If that costs more money, okay, fine, but does it make your life easier? If you can work without interruption, I think that's the key. I'm old, so when I run into plugins that have very small fonts that cause me to have to zoom in on the screen to make adjustments to, those are problematic.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, they are.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. I'm doing these mixing videos. Sometimes I can see myself in the mixing videos just going, like, looking at the screen like this, because I can't really see what the frequency is, and which is really just an example of, you should be using your ears anyway. You shouldn't be using you shouldn't actually be seeing the frequency if you can help it, because it's easier just to make sure that it sounds good. But yeah, I like being able to full screen plugins if I really get nitty gritty on it. The Fab Filter is great for that sort of stuff. Fab Filter Pro 3 especially. Like, if you've never gone into full screen mode, it's fun. It's just a weird thing to do, honestly. I do, so even though I do talk about step-by-step mixing, how to create great mixes with only 5 plugins, and I teach you how to use EQ, compression, reverb, delay, and saturation. It's my mission to make you understand how those important plugins work and those important processors work. so that when you are using either stock plugins or fancy premium plugins, you at least know the functionality and what each thing is supposed to do. Now, many plugins have, fancy proprietary settings, or they're supposed to add some magic sauce or some secret sonic recipe that is special to them, and that's cool because sometimes you can just add that into your repertoire and add that into your mix template, and that'll give you stuff to give you some options to do. But I think that ultimately you should also know exactly how your stock plugins work, because they're always there for you. You don't have to worry too much about whether you have a license on that computer or it's expired, or it's, you have to upgrade, or you have to pay your subscription or whatever. Recently I just I threw out my Waves transient designer because I much prefer the Logic stock transient designer than that. So sometimes the stock plugins can actually be preferred.
Yeah, I think Logic stock plugins are outstanding, really.
Yeah,
But
the
and
compressor is
I'm not a Logic is not my primary DAW, but the times I've done records in Logic, I've been stunned at how cool the plugins are.
right. Yeah, they they definitely look very cool these days. I started with Logic 8, and the compressor looked quite a bit different back in those days than it does now. But all right, we have another question here from the pre-submitted ones. Joshua asks, he's using Fruit Loops or FL Studio. How do I compare my song with another of my choice after mastering in terms of quality? So basically, how do you use reference mixes in order to get your mixes sounding as close to commercial quality as possible? What's your process for using references?
I've got a monitor controller here in front of me made by the company Grace in Colorado. And it's a monitor controller that a lot of beginners probably wouldn't have because it's kind of expensive. But what I tend to do is I'll find the song that I'm trying to reference, generally on like Amazon Music HD, where I'm streaming, like a 16-bit 44.1 file across the internet. And I've got a switcher to switch between that song and the output of my Pro Tools rig, and I can A/B back and forth. These days, I'm at a point where I trust where I'm at and where my room is at, and how things translate and how I hear things, to the point where I may just listen to the song before I even begin, listen to it and go, okay, there's where I understand where all the different gotchas are. Like, where's the bottom end on this? Oh, what about the kick drum? Okay, where's the vocal sitting? Okay, how bright or dull are the guitars? Listen to that once, kind of internalize it, shut it off, go in and mix. And maybe a couple hours into a mix, when I've got everything kind of roughed in and to my general liking, like a flower arrangement, so to speak, a flower arrangement.
Okay.
Got everything in place. Nothing's automated. Nothing's moving around yet. That's when I'll do a quick A/B comparison and go, okay, am I still good? Oh yeah, I'm still pretty good actually. And that's generally how I do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I tend to import references. Sometimes I do it actually at the end more so than necessarily at the beginning, and I just level match them to usually the masters that the client or the student has referenced is, professional master, and therefore way louder than my mix. So I have to make sure that it's at least comparatively the same volume. So I'll use a metering plugin to achieve that. Usually it's, a negative a few dBs below zero, so that it compares. So I don't go cry in the corner immediately after comparing my mix to a professional master. And then I look at the frequency response just to give me an idea, And then very similar to what you do, it's like, where's the vocal, where's the high end, like what's in the high end, how like how is the low end and the low mids, especially, like how are they defined, what's the curve there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes I'm actually very shocked by how muddy some commercial mixes can be once you've level matched them in some way. Like it's like, oh, there's a lot of low mids here that I don't feel like I feel like could be, you know, cleaned up a little bit.
That's the odd thing too. Like there are bands that I like a lot that I've followed for years, and as you get kind of deep into your journey as an audio person, and when it comes to mixing or mastering, you get to a point where you start to be able to identify songs that you think are poorly mixed from
Right.
bands that you respect, and that's
Right.
tough. You know, a song that you think, "Oh, man, I love that song," and then you put it on and you listen to it, and you're like, "Oh my god, this mix is awful,"
Yup.
or flat.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely well, we lost Matt, it seems like. Well, I will piggyback on that comment if everybody can still hear me.
Oh, no,
Uh
I'm here. Are you there?
yeah, yeah, I'm still here.
We cut out for a
Yeah,
sec.
we're having audio issues.
I think we're having audio and video issues.
Well, I mean, everybody's online. There's 7 billion people stuck inside. Well, maybe not. It's maybe an exaggeration, but there's definitely a stress on the servers for sure.
Did you
Uh,
plug in your Ethernet?
no, when was I supposed to do that?
Oh, I don't know.
um, yeah. So video is lagging too. Oh, that's great. Do you know some free or cheap? Here's another question we got from Laro. Do you know some free or cheap vintage EQ plugins?
Hmm.
I don't know any. Um, I don't know any free ones because Logic has stock like tube EQ and analog emulations, and then I just use the premium plugins that I have on top of all that stuff. What about you? Do you know any of, or do you have any favorite sort of low budget or like inexpensive or free plugin?
Massey plugins, although I don't know if Steve Massey is still supporting
Hmm.
his plugins anymore, but there's a lot of low cost plugins out there that oh, I tell you, Audio Thing, go to Audio Thing's website. They have a new free blindfold EQ, I believe. And blindfold meaning you can't see what frequency you're affecting.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm on their website. It's audiothing.com, and turns out they have an anniversary sale of 35% off their plugins. So go nuts.
I just bought 2 more last night. I
Oh
bought
man.
Megaphone and Springs, the reverb plugin.
Okay. Well, I'll have to look into this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really need more, but
But you know, I don't know what cheap is, Lauro. I don't know,
right,
like, what's cheap to you? Because one person's cheap is another person's overpriced.
right. And yeah, so Alan is screaming here, Waves. Obviously, Waves is very inexpensive because they're always on sale.
Always.
It's, I mean, and I'm Waves gets a lot of flack on forums, but I dig them. I like them.
You know, the reason they get a lot of flack, or not the only reason, one of the reasons is several years ago they did this thing where they were trying to sue studio owners who were using cracked plugins of theirs. And they
Yeah,
went about it in a very kind of not so cool way of
yeah, like a Lars Ulrich Napster sort of way.
no, kind of a, "Hey, I wanna book your studio, but I gotta come check your
Um,
computer out first and see what plugins you have in person." Like, there was a lot of red flags, but some studio owners got sued, and, I don't know, man, they kinda I didn't do that, and I don't believe in using cracked plugins personally, but that kind of irritated me. I was like, "That's not cool."
yeah. And even if you even if you do use crank plugins, which I don't recommend, because if you want to do this as a business or be a professional, you should also be a professional about it. And if you can't afford it, you have stock plugins that you can spend time learning how to use until you have the money to buy the premium plugins, because they are worth what they're asking for, because it's a lot of programming hours and a lot of, run business and developing products is not cheap or easy. So
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. All right. We have a few questions here from the doc. Enrique Ocasio Emanuele. Greetings from Puerto Rico. My sister purchased your book. Thank you, sister. For me, and it helped me a lot. I might be late for my questions, but here they are anyway. You're never late for a question, because as long as people keep showing up, I'll keep doing these happy hours, because they're fun, and I'm happy to share what I can share. But his question is, why do bass frequencies tend to build up more drastically than high-end frequencies? So in my slightly uneducated opinion on physics, they just have more energy. They are larger. The wavelength of a bass frequency is larger and is honestly bigger physical size than high end in general. So
yeah.
And then he also asked, why do sometimes when mixing drums, do the overheads get in the way of the electric guitar?
Because the frequency of the cymbals is competing with the guitars. That's why sometimes if you're recording people, it really, like, I went through a process with these twin brothers that were in a duo together, guitar and drum duo. And we actually went through the process of swapping out the cymbals to not compete with the guitars.
Right. Huh, that's a very elaborate way of going about it.
Yeah, kind of, getting it at the source, like solving the problem right up front. Otherwise, you've got to do some kind of drastic things to make a mix happen.
Right. Yeah, and so it's definitely, like 2 to 5K, especially like where it's harsh and edgy. That's where both the attack of the cymbals and the raunchiness of the guitars often live. So trying to figure out how to carve space out for both of those things it can be pretty important. I will say also that sometimes there can be some power lacking in a rock mix, and I've learned that it can be because your cymbals just aren't loud enough, and they aren't playing with the guitars too. So you need that balance where the guitars are playing with the cymbals while still not getting in the way of the cymbals, and vice versa.
I'm reading Thomas's question ahead of you.
Yeah, I was put it on the screen here. All right, next.
Oh, that's easier. See, the font's bigger when you do that. That's great for old people like me.
Thomas asks, hello, greetings from Argentina. I've seen that in many plugins you can select the meter calibration, -8, -14, -8. Yeah. And how does that affect your processing? I don't actually.
I'd have to see what an example of that.
Yeah.
Thomas, is there a particular plugin that you're referring to that does that?
Yeah. We'll circle back to him.
And is that affecting the metering, or is that affecting the actual output of the plugin?
Right. Yeah, because is it just right. Is it just the metering of is it setting the output in a certain fixed way, or can you just twist it? It's just the metering.
Over loud, Jim 76, just the metering. Oh, well, if that's just affecting the metering, I mean, and not the output and not the sonic quality of it, then let me look that plugin up. I've never even heard of that plugin. I want to check that out. Thank you for the tip there, Thomas.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up right now while he's.
Yeah, while we check that out, Laros he gave us his budget. $50 is inexpensive for him, which I would agree with. Anything lower than $50 is pretty reasonably priced, which basically means that you can almost get any single waves in for that price. I think most of the plugins that I've paid for it's been between $29 and $49. So go nuts.
I'm looking for it now. Wait.
Yeah. While you look for that, and feel free to submit any question for those that are sitting and having a beer with us, and cheers also. While okay, gotcha. Spence Burton asks, when I'm mixing, the thing I have to think about the most is what dynamic tweaks can the mastering engineer do better than me. If I EQ a mix as good as I possibly can, what should I do dynamically versus what the mastering engineer can do? So basically, what good is a mastering engineer these days?
It's a good thing we don't have Ian on our call right now.
I know. No, but seriously, mastering engineers, well, first things first is people often gloss over the fact that it's another human being with their own perspectives, their own experiences, their own professional opinion on sonics, often with very highly trained ears that might be able to hear something that you don't. For example, I mixed a song the other day, or I mastered a song the other day, and while I was working on the high end, I was adding some boosts in the high end to add some air, and I thought that there was like a real high end harmonic of the cymbals around 15K, and I just sent the mixing engineer, or in this case the musician / mixing engineer, a note saying like, hey, can you rebounce your mix with just a cut in the cymbals around 15K, just so that when I raise the level it doesn't increase the cymbals too much, because I want that air, but it's too much on just on the drums. And he couldn't hear it because he was older, probably maybe didn't have as trained ears or something like that. And he just he said like, well, yeah, I did it for you, but I honestly couldn't hear it. But it was very apparent when I was adding a boost at 15K how much that hi-hat came out, or that cymbal came out. So sometimes the mastering engineers just have more highly trained ears than you. They have better equipment that might have better tuned rooms, and better trained ears, and they have experience hearing subtle EQ changes. Because like when I master, I'm making EQ moves from half a dB to about 2 dB. If I start making heavier dB changes than that, maybe it's a mix revisit instead of a mastering fix.
You know what I'm having trouble with? I'm still on Thomas's thing. I'm having trouble finding a good high res image of the Gem 76, which is essentially an 1176 recreation in a plugin. And so, Thomas, if you find a good picture that you can send our way, that would be great, because I'm on their website and man, it is really tough to find out or find a good picture.
Interesting. Well, let's move on to Brandon's question, which is kind of a follow-up to some of the mastering that I was talking about. He says, tracks in Studio One that read at minus 12 dB full scale on my master out. These sound so quiet compared to professional recordings at the same level. What do professional engineers do to make it louder? So are you level matching the professional recordings so that they are matching minus 12 on their own masters as well? That would be my first question back, I guess. But what do professional engineers do to make it louder? Well, it's for mastering, it's basically mostly EQ, multi-band compression in my case, and then limiting. So those are the if I were to make a mastering with 3 plugins book, those would be the 3 most important plugins. So yeah, peak levels. Okay, peak levels, by the way. So your track is peaking at -12. I have I doubt that a professional mastered recording is peaking at -12 dB full scale.
I think he's saying, or is he saying his recordings are peaking at -12?
Right, maybe, but well, you have 12 dB of headroom, so use it, I guess. If you're gonna master it yourself, you have plenty of room to raise the level of that track with a careful blend of EQing the low end so that it isn't taking up a bunch of space when you're increasing the volume of the track, and then multi-band compression to squeeze things together, and then limiting to take some of the peaks out that may, if you have a kick and a snare that's maybe louder than everything else, and then your waveform is going like that all the time, like those peaks might not necessarily need to be so much louder than the rest of the track, especially if it's just a kick and snare. You can use parallel compression in the mix to get a better balance between the peaks and valleys, and then use limiting and multi-band. Well, I don't necessarily always like using limiting to cut things off from the top. I like using parallel compression to add things in from the bottom.
Thomas, I downloaded the manual, but what I'm saying is page 31 does not jive with what you're saying. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, meter calibration. Oh, here we go. Let's look it up.
Oh.
Love this, that we can interact with everybody like this.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Calibration. Okay, let me look it up here. There it is.
What's that? You can share your screen if you want.
Let me see. I'm just saying the CPU impossible high frequencies. The higher the oversampling, the greater. Okay, and for plugins like the Gem. Okay, I see. GEMS meters are calibrated to show a level of 0 VU when fed a 1K sine wave with a peak level of -14 dBFS. That's decibel before full scale, which is the factory calibration. You can select one from a list of 4. Oh, so this is purely metering. Okay. Yeah. So the answer to the question, if we're going back to the heart of the question, which let me go back.
I got it.
Okay. I've seen that in many places like the meter calibration. How does that affect my processing? It doesn't. It's only affecting your metering and how the meter responds to the incoming or outgoing signal. I'm going to say incoming in this case, I think. So it doesn't affect your processing, and it's purely a user interface thing.
Yeah.
So I hope that
don't look at the meters.
Don't look at the meters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Put a piece of tape over that meter.
Yeah. 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 Just focus on making the track sound good. I think nobody's gonna email you because they listen to your song on Spotify and demand to see your meter readings.
That's right. Nobody's ever going to say, I bet you had the meter calibration set at -14 dBFS. They're never going to do that. So I wouldn't even worry about it, Thomas. It's purely visual, it's not an aural thing.
All right. Feel free to submit any more questions. Anybody who's just joined us, we're having a beer. I'm having a beer with Matt Boudreau of Working Class Audio. Thank you for joining us for Audio Issues Happy Hour, where I answer random questions from the audience. Hope that they help you make better mixes. We have a question here from Happy, not Iron Man's assistant, but hip hop producer of some sort. He said, I'm glad I ran across you. Thank you for your willingness to spread the information that is very valuable. Thank you for reading. My biggest challenge as a home musician is blending the vocals into the beat. I find that in most of my mixes, the vocals are either overpowering standout or too drowned into the beat. I am assuming I need to learn more about compression. I'd really love your input into this. So for me, this is I'm going to make the assumption that we have one vocal track of some sort and then a stereo mix of some sort that he's trying to fit together.
Sounds like it.
Right. And what I would immediately go to, at least to start with, I would try to well, first you try to make it so that the levels are sort of the same, or the level of the vocal, fits with the beat, so balancing. But then I would maybe carve out an EQ pocket in the high mid so that the vocal kind of gets to sit there. And then I would compress the two tracks together so that they glued together better, and then master that way. How would you approach it?
Well, one of the things that I, dealing in a lot of rock music, trying to get vocals to, let's say you have this bed of two guitars panned left and right, bass, drums, and everything's really kind of full force. Getting
Yeah.
a great vocal to sit on top of that sometimes can be a challenge, depends on the vocalist. But really, for me, it starts with it's a balancing issue for the most part, 90% of it, where you you set the vocal at a particular volume and you kind of bring in everything around it. You kind of One of the tricks that I like to use is I like to get the drums and the vocal up at the same time and make it so that I'm feeling the power of the drums, but the vocal is cutting through just in a pure rock drum vocal mix. And then I
Hmm.
bring in the bass around that, make sure that I can make that fit. And
Yeah.
then it's just bringing things in one at a time. So that's one step, just a pure balancing thing. Another trick is uh, to have, first of all, a doubled vocal if you can. Maybe the vocal's
Mm.
doubled in the choruses, maybe it's
Yeah.
single tracked in the verses, or maybe it's double tracked through the whole thing. Um, and kind of an addendum to that, or not an addendum, but more kind of uh, an addition that you can do to either a single or a double vocal is you can send the vocal into a modulation type effect, and that could be one of my favorite is the Roland Dimension D from Universal Audio, which is a recreation of Roland's Dimension D, which was a hardware unit. It's kind of a coursing unit, but you could use a light coursing where the modulation isn't so radical, and it's very slow moving, so it doesn't give you an alien type effect. But if you
Right.
send it into there and blend it in parallel, so you have the dry vocal here, I'm going to try to get my hands above the screen. So you have the dry vocal, and then you have the chorused vocal or flanged
Mm.
vocal or whatever
Yeah.
kind of not harmonic, modulation type effect you want to use, and blend it in there so that there's movement in that secondary vocal. And so it's not an identical version of your vocal. And by bringing that in, especially as a stereo effect, it really kind of broadens the vocal around it. And you can still bring the drums up. And in case this, what we think is like a hip hop type situation with drum track beat with a vocal, that's what
Mhm.
I would be doing. That would be my go-to thing.
Cool.
Did I make
Yeah.
any sense, or is that just all
No,
just
I mean, there's just so many ways to do that, because it becomes this sort of, you know, making it fit together frequency wise or production wise. And so, like, even with a simple track like that, you can approach it so many different ways.
yeah.
And then the more vocals you add on, you double them up, or you add some ad libs or whatever. At that point, you might have a stereo beat and a bunch of vocal tracks, and then you're sort of having to mix those together. And yeah, there's just a lot of different ways of doing that.
After having mixed rock for so long, I would love to mix a hip hop track where you've got, a beat and a vocal and you've got some space.
Yeah.
There you could bring some real power there because you've got, like I say, you got all that space.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Unless the beat is super dense and highly produced, but we'll
Yeah,
assume, yeah.
there's always
Yeah.
that.
All right. Cool. I think we got time for maybe one question. And maybe one more from the audience if somebody wants to chime in. But Brandon writes in with a quick question: does it hurt the quality to route, for example, 3 kick drums after some EQ separation to its own kick drum bus, so then as I'm mixing they can sound more together? Especially like when you're using a few different sends and instead of linking it to all 3 kick, what do you think? Just trying to acquire some tools for the toolbox and what can be combined into one mix bus to see if we can decrease any unnecessary extra work. No, I think that would be fine. I tend to simplify the tracks as much as possible. If I have 3 kick drum tracks, I'll balance them and then I'll route them to a group or route them to a kick bus. What about you?
So, just so I understand the question, is it that it's the same kick drum broken off into 3 different frequencies, or is it 3 different kick drums?
No, I think it's 3 different kick drums. So it'd be 3 different samples, for instance. So it's I'm taking it as a layering question.
Okay.
So you have 3 different things, and then so that you don't have to do all this processing on 3 different tracks, you can maybe do a tiny bit of tweaking, and then you put them all to one bus, and then you process it with one instrument.
Well, then I think the number one thing before you EQ or compress anything is to make sure all the kick drums are in phase. In other words, every one of those is all signals have a peak and a valley, but look at the beginning of where the kick drum starts, and and zoom in real deep on the DAW, and you'll see it'll start with a peak or it'll start with a valley. And if you have 2 kick drums and one starts with a peak and the other one starts with a valley, you're going to have some phase issues and there's going to be some cancellation that happens. So you got to make sure that they're both starting in the same direction. Make sure it's either they both start with a valley or they both start with a peak. And once you do that, you build up a level of power there that'll allow you to balance that right from the get-go. And you probably won't have to do as much processing to solve for the things that, what am I trying to say? The artifacts of that. If things are out of phase, it's going to cause you to go, oh, well, that's weird. I bring up the second one and the third one and it all gets weird. And then you start to EQ that out and then it gets even worse. So start with everything in phase and then, salt to taste or EQ to taste.
Right. Well, cool, guys. For those of you that have joined before, I tend to end these with a book recommendation, and I would be remiss not to recommend the excellent book, Working Class Audio Journal, Volume 1, by Mr. Matt Boudreau of Working Class Audio. An excellent collection of interviews you've done over the years with some very hard-hitting names, really cool people on the cover: Andrew Sheps, Kim Rosen, Langston Mazinga, and Mark Kilburn. So if you are looking for insights and inspiration from seasoned veterans of the industry, I highly recommend checking out Working Class Audio. You can find it on Amazon, I believe.
You can.
Yeah.
And inevitably by my book is people also bought. And then there's your book, of course. That's right.
Yeah.
Which I also, it's sitting on my shelf over here.
Very, very cool. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Matt. It was a pleasure having you and a lot of fun to be able to bounce these questions off of you as well.
Yeah. I'll see you at 6 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, for a regular weekly meeting, the meeting of the masterminds where we plot world domination of the audio blogging industry. Thank you all for coming, guys. It's been a pleasure. I hope it was helpful. I hope you had fun, and most of all, I hope you had some delicious beer or beverage of your choice. All right, take it easy, guys. Have a good one.
Guys.
See you later.